So my name's Justin. I go by Judd though, so Judd Lionheart. I'm a trainer here or a sports performance specialist at Acceleration in Austin, Texas. And what we do is we specialize mostly in speed development of young and college age athletes. So just everything that entails, from teaching the proper techniques to mechanics and mobility, strength and power development, everything that goes into that. Working around whatever injuries they may have incurred at school so they can keep seeing progress here with us until they're fully recovered, things like that. So that's our main specialty here.
Oh man, that sounds great, man. So how long have you been doing that for?
I've been here since 2012.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I was a like fitness director at World Gym in Chicago for a while, and then before that, I was in the Army. So I did 2 years in 10th Mountain, and then 3 more years in 75th Ranger. Before that, I was a personal trainer back in San Diego, and then prior to that, I played football at Truman State University in Missouri, where I got my degree in exercise physiology.
Wow,
So
man. So you are both a college athlete and you also got a degree in physiology, exercise physiology, correct?
yeah,
And
correct.
so
Long time ago.
you've been in the also in the military. What branch of the military?
I was an Army infantry officer, so just led a platoon of guys. So I was a platoon leader, basically
Oh,
for most of
wow,
my
that's
time
cool.
there. Yeah, so I joined, then I got assigned to the 10th Mountain Division up in New York. One deployment there in Iraq with them, and then when I was over there, I applied to and was accepted into the 75th Ranger Regiment, and then I was a PL for them for 2 deployments, and then I got out. So
Oh man, that sounds great. So I do have a question. So when it comes to like the military, what training did you gather from them that you bring to the people that you train currently? Is there anything special or
yeah, first of all, I think in our field we really put emphasis on strength, power, and speed development, right? And
hmm
I think sometimes in the military, I think we lose sight of the fact that those things are important, but they're not of primary importance. And a
hmm
lot of it is just work capacity. So the guys in the military, they have to be strong and powerful and fast, but mainly a lot of it is just work capacity and robustness and resilience. So you know basically injury proofing guys because they have to carry a load for long distances. They're gonna have to move 10, 12 hours with little food and be able to perform after that. So we're talking about like being able to maintain their glycogen reserves, utilize
hmm
their fat stores, things like that. So I think we lose sight of that as performance coaches sometimes. And they just need like a basic amount of the things that we tend to emphasize for our like short duration, high intensity type stuff. But that being said, for a long time, there was a complete dearth of training in the military for strength, speed, and power. And I think they're starting to do a much better job of it in the last 5 to 10 years.
Okay. So it sounds so basically like in the military, endurance goes a long way and mental capacity for training and enduring hardship also goes a very long way.
Correct. Yeah. It's mental toughness, resiliency, but also, the physiological aspects of it too, like just, tendon health and mobility, core health and strength, things like that. Being able to, like I said, the energy utilization, I mean, training those systems to where you don't just drain your glycogen reserves and, that you're able to tap into fat reserves easily, things like that. Yeah. They kind of emphasize the importance because when I got in the military, I was an athlete, right? And I kind of had to learn to be more like robust and resilient, as far as like long duration type movements and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, so now when it comes to your current athletes that you train, how do you go about basically making sure they have that mental capacity and also that physical capacity as well, ensuring that they're not injuring themselves, but while at the same time having a large workload on their bodies, training for explosiveness, lifting heavy weights, training for speed. That's a lot on the human body. So how do you go about ensuring that they don't get hurt?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, man. I love that question. And every athlete is an individual, has to be approached differently. But a lot of it, I mean, first of all, you cannot ensure somebody won't get hurt. Obviously that's
Of
impossible. But we
course,
can
of
put
course.
stack the deck in their favor as much as possible. And
hmm
A lot of it is just not viewing what we do as just another workout. Because we analyze the athlete, we figure out where their weak points are.
Hmm.
We talk to them about what they've done that day and earlier in the week and what they have coming up. Make sure what we're doing fits in that, to make sure that we're not further, degrading their energy systems and their ability to recover. And we work within that framework. So a lot of it is like technique work, mobility work, strengthening weak points, like, if they have muscle imbalances or if their sequencing's off, or and anything that's going to expose them to injury, we work to correct that first of all. And there are times when we work them pretty hard to build up like work capacity and things like that, but that's not a main focus of what we do. They get a lot of that outside of here, so they're out there running gassers and things like that. And then as far as the resiliency part, a lot of it is just talking to them when they bring up things, when they start to talk about how much they got on their mind and how much they're worried about, and trying to give them the mental toolbox to compartmentalize that thing and those things, and just take one thing at a time and only worry about the thing that they can affect at that moment. And trying to help them with the mental resiliency to, when they're not doing something, to maybe know when to clear their mind and focus on breathing, and let their parasympathetic system take over a little bit. And the importance of recovery, like the little things like good nutrition, sleep, setting the stage when they go to bed, so they're not on video games or on their phone right before they go to bed if they got a big day the next day. All the little things that we already know about.
Okay, so
Just making, and then,
hmm no,
oh,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, man.
No,
Oh
go
yeah, I
ahead.
mean, a lot of it is like we just like break stuff down. Like, instead, I love hang cleans. For this is just a random example, but they're already doing a lot of hang cleans. So, we just focus on. I might film a hang clean and kind of see what portion of that sequence they're not doing correctly, or if there's some tightness in their hip flexors, things like that. And then we just focus on those little things, to so when we send them back out there, they're just a little bit more capable and robust.
Okay. I mean, you have made some great points because as a trainer myself, I tend to focus on certain aspects of training, and I really try to emphasize such as recovery and also sleep. A lot of not just athletes, but a lot of people before they go to bed, they have their phones right in their faces, looking on Instagram, watching TV. They have all the blue lights coming into their eyes, and then they find themselves struggling to sleep at night and recovery and sleep. So that's something that I want to put to the side because that's something that I want to talk about further in depth with you. But I do want to right now shift to more training and then get back to that. So when it comes to training for speed and power, which is what I'm really all about when it comes to my page, but also strength and making sure we're avoiding injuries. What are your basic principles and fundamentals of speed and power and in relation to strength training? Because I know a lot of newcomers who never lift any weights. They just think they're going to do plyometrics and sprints, and they're not getting their full potential out there. And I really want to emphasize the importance of lifting weights and how that correlates to power, injury prevention, and also just overall performance.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. You have purists out there that are like, never lift a weight slowly, or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, or weight training is not important. And I view weight training as like the foundation of the force production part of it. Because whether you want to call it power or speed or whatever you want to call it, it's all force, right? So there needs to be that foundation of force first. And then we can argue about the semantics and the minutia of how to train for that all day long, and that's great. But basically, the athlete has to be able to produce a lot of force, period.
Hmm.
And now there's a limit. So you have guys that just love the weight room, right? And then and there's a limit to how much that'll benefit you, of course. But until an athlete is just generally strong, it's going to be really hard for them to be fast and powerful too. And I see a lot of really strong guys that aren't fast and powerful, but I never really see a fast guy or a guy that can jump that isn't strong, at least for his body weight. You know what I mean? Like, so if an athlete doesn't have that strength foundation, that's one of our primary focuses.
Hmm.
And we have to separate strength from bodybuilding. Everybody always
Oh, of
associates big
course,
muscles with strong muscles, like,
of
and
course.
I am into bodybuilding a little bit. So that's something I like, but I'm also smart enough to recognize that that's not the same thing. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to have, and you shouldn't really have really big muscles to optimize your athletic performance, because at some point in time they just become a hindrance. So, in this culture in America, man, everything's based on bodybuilding, dude. And it's cool, but it's almost like a sickness to some point. And then you go overseas and it's almost refreshing because they're able to, go at things with that free of that bodybuilding mindset just buried into their background, like everybody thinks you need to do the 3 sets of 8 and the 4 sets of 10 or whatever that is. And you don't really need to do that, I mean, there might be small times in the year where that's appropriate, but you don't need a ton of volume. I mean, of heavy strength training. It just needs to be like a consistent dose and stimulus. And, I always say, I try to dumb things down and I always say lift weights until the movement becomes light and then turn that light movement into a bounce and then point that bounce in the right direction. Just try to dumb it down. But if your movements are heavy, good luck trying to bounce that heavy weight. You know what I mean? Like, so
That's no, that's honestly true because you know, I, personally for me, as I've been through this whole coaching thing, I've done a lot of learning on my own, and especially the difference between strength training and training for size. So basically, strength training is really focused on your central nervous system when you're doing heavy sets, about 80 to 95% of your one rep max for about 1 to 3 to 4 reps. And then when it comes to training for size bodybuilding, you're doing lighter loads, such as 40 to 70% of your one rep max, and you're doing anywhere from 8 to maybe 20 reps an exercise. And another thing about strength training is, especially when it comes to speed and performance, is that when you're lifting the weights, your goal is to move the weight fast, but in a controlled manner so that you're not risking injury. So, for example, if you're training to increase your vertical jump or your speed, you're squatting, but you're not squatting, too slowly. I mean, of course, that has a place as well, but you want to move the weight fast so that you're actually mimicking explosive movements. So, now, when people hear that, they really worry about injuries. They're like, I'm lifting heavy weights. I don't want to one rep max, and it could really, really hurt me. So how do you, and maybe you've had athletes like that, and if you have, you can tell me about that and the viewers. But if you have had athletes like that, how do you go about reassuring them that, look, injuries are part of the game, but what we're doing is safe if you're doing it with the right technique, and we're doing it with the right basic steps, if that makes sense.
yeah, I mean, that's exactly it, man. I mean, it has to be a slow and deliberate progression into it. Like, I'm not going to have a kid come in that's never lifted weights and do like a really fast, eccentric, explosive barbell back squat. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yes.
And I think if the weights are moving slowly, there's a certain time when that's okay, as long as the intent is to try to move them quickly, especially on the concentric, right? So you might
Hmm.
be pushing on something and it's not moving very fast, but if you're trying, if your nervous system is just firing as fast as it can, that's still going to develop that baseline force, and that will transfer into power and speed down the road. Now, the volume of you doing that needs to be very low. I'm talking maybe
Yes.
2 slow, heavy reps a week where you're trying to move that weight fast, and it's a very small dose. Like, you don't need a lot of that. The most of the rest of it just comes with like sequencing and patterning and flow and practicing your sport and practicing the biomechanics of what you're trying to do. That has a lot more volume. Now, I always call it working the spectrum, right? Now, you want some of that very heavy load that's moving slowly, but you're trying to move it fast. You want a little bit of that, but then you also want those power type movements like the like trap bar jumps. And then you also want further down the spectrum, you want to start doing those broad jumps, for distance. And then
Hmm.
it's like split jumps for height. But then you got to get into the hopping and the bouncing, maybe loaded a little bit at first, And so when I train athletes, we normally go fast to slow. So like in reverse order after the warm ups and mobility, right? Make sure they're good. But most of the quick stuff, we do that first, like the sprinting, the over speed training, and then we go into like some loaded under speed, like resisted sprints, and then we go into more like the broad jumps, and then we go into like the weighted verticals, and then at the very end we'll do a couple sets of of a very heavy lift where the weight might not be moving very fast, but they're trying to move it fast. Now, so it's kind of working the spectrum, but in reverse order, fast to slow. Like, you don't want an athlete to do heavy squats and then, as a general rule, and then go out and try to sprint, right? Like, that's not, or jump as high as they can. That's not really ideal. I guess there are cases where it's okay, but generally no. But also now to get an athlete started, there's a time though when they need to focus on very slow eccentrics and controlled movement and pausing at the bottom and going up slow, just so they build that pattern and they build like genuine or general tissue quality and things like that, just to build a base before they really start pushing on stuff really heavy, right? So that does come into play, but now that's not bodybuilding. There might be some crossover there, like in bodybuilding, they might use slow eccentrics too, but that's not the point of this.
Hmm.
It's just to build that general tissue quality first, so it's a little bit safer before we start it. You know what I mean? Um, yes, there's a time and place for almost everything, but
I mean that makes perfect sense because if you're going to be doing explosive movements, you want to be fresh for those movements. One of the things is, when you're doing something like sprinting or jump or vertical jump, squat jumps, you want to be at your maximal force because if you're not at maximal, you're not really improving the speed, nor are you improving the vertical. So, beginning with the speed first and then slowly moving towards the slower movements, that makes perfect sense. That makes a
and
lot
that's
of
what people don't understand either, man. Like, they think, they get this CrossFit mindset where they don't
uh,
give themselves full recovery and they do 100 reps or something. I'm like, that's not making you faster, man. I mean, when we come here after drills and some starts, the kid might run 4 full speed 40s, maybe at most, right?
hmm.
Sometimes it's like 2, and they need a very small dose of that. Now some of the more extensive things like easy hopping and skipping, of course, we do more of that. But when it gets like right at that edge of intensity, like all out vertical jumping, I mean, I'm talking maybe 10 all out vertical jumps the entire hour. You know what I mean? Like, so people got to like take a step back. It's like, and let yourself recover. Like between sets. It's very
Yeah,
important.
and you spoke about CrossFit and personally for me, I'm not a fan of CrossFit because I think it's a recipe for injuries and it's not specific enough for any sport. If you're training for a sport, CrossFit is not what you want to do. But when it comes to recovery in between sets, if you're an athlete trying to run faster, jump higher, the football players, the basketball players, the track athletes, it's very important that you really make sure you're focusing on proper recovery between sets, not just proper recovery outside of working out. And so another question that I do have for you is what type of athletes do you mostly train? Like what sports are they in and what are their
Oh
goals
man.
in sport?
Well, obviously, the most numbers we have is football, just because the most kids play football, right? But we
Hmm.
train across the board. So lots of baseball players, because speed and power transfers or translates into that hitting a baseball. Like, what people don't realize is like sprinting is, even if you don't full speed sprint in your sport ever, like volleyball,
Hmm.
right? There's never full speed. The benefits to the central nervous system for all out sprinting will result in you hitting a volleyball harder and you jumping higher. And same with baseball. Let's say you're a shortstop and you'll never get to full speed. All out sprinting will help you hit a baseball further. I mean, it's a known thing. You
And it
don't need a
comes from
lot
the
of it.
hip. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a nervous system thing. Like, if you get a more
Hmm.
efficient, powerful neural drive, and there's no better way to do that than an all out sprint. And you don't need very much of it. Like 1 or 2 all out sprints a week will give you the stimulus you need for maybe holding top speed for 2 seconds. So we're talking about 4 seconds a week of all out sprinting a week. 4 seconds is enough to create a stimulus for the nervous system to enhance other attributes of your sport. So, if you unless you're hurt, if you're never doing an all-out sprint ever, you're missing a big piece of that pie. So, I mean, we train lacrosse players, baseball players, golfers, man. Sprinting will help you hit a golf ball further, believe it or not. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, we see it happen all the time. So a golfer will come in here and we'll have them do some 40s every week and they'll start driving the golf ball further. So sprinting is, I don't look at it as it's a nervous system thing, like let's train the nervous system. And it's just like jumping, man. If you're not doing all out jumps, you're missing a key component.
Yeah,
Like
and
I remember
that
our strength coach never had us do plyometrics. I'm like,
really.
that was insane. It was insane to me. Like we got big and strong, and we'd hang clean and everything else, but I don't ever remember doing like bounding or hopping or skipping or any of that stuff. And
You
that's
know,
not that uncommon in college athletics right now, is to just completely neglect the power aspect.
so do you have college athletes that are not performing plyometrics in their training, in their part of their training routine?
It's crazy. Yeah. Yeah. It's insane.
Wow.
I have college athletes that I'm talking about Notre Dame, Texas. Texas, Oklahoma, UT that come back here, and they have never been taught proper sprint mechanics at their college. They have never been taught how to do an alternate leg bound correctly, you know, but they'll do hang cleans 3 times a week. You know what I mean? Like it,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it's starting to get a little bit better, man. You know, I'll see some improvements. So they focus more on like some strength coaches are focused more on like bar speed and bar velocity. They have the tendo stuff. So they're starting to understand the importance of it now. And then I think they're starting to get more like the 1080 stuff that we have that measures your like horizontal sprinting power and things like that. But man, it's like they're way late to the game. I mean, and I can't complain about it too much. I mean, it's kept us in business, but I mean, they're way late to the game, bro.
No, no, it's funny that you mentioned proper sprint mechanics because a lot of times many athletes think that's for sprinters. Basketball players, the football players, they don't have proper sprint mechanics. And what they don't realize is when you have bad sprint mechanics, that also has a downward effect in your movements, which are leading to injuries and muscle imbalances. So it's very important. It's not just for track athletes to have proper running mechanics, it's also for any athlete in any sport, whether it's baseball, whether it's basketball, whether it's football. You have to make sure you have proper sprint mechanics because a lot of times I'm watching a basketball game and I'm seeing these guys, their arms are all over
Oh
the
man,
place, their legs are going to the sides. I'm like, how have you made it this far? You know what
it's
I
crazy,
mean?
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
And so I think that's another key area that athletes really have to focus on, which is just proper mechanics, whether it's vertical jump, whether it's squatting, whether it's benching. You know, that's something that's I think is just really missing these days, proper mechanics. So how do you go about making sure that your athletes are, you know, really working on their mechanics? Just for example, when it comes to sprinting and vertical jumping or a two-step vertical jump approach. How do you go about really ensuring that they're working on that? And how many times a week would you recommend someone to work on their mechanics and technique when it comes to sprinting and jumping?
Oh man, these are great questions. You know, and it's hard to have a definitive answer for that because everybody's
Hmm.
situation is unique.
Of
But
course.
you know, when a kid comes to us, when an athlete comes to us, the first thing I have them do is just a walking lunge, because there's so many things I can learn from a walking lunge. It tells me like what their base level strength is. If you're having a hard time with a walking lunge, we got some strength stuff to do. It tells me how tight their hip flexors are. It tells me if their sequencing's good. It tells me if those little hips, muscles on their hips can stabilize their knee joint or not. It tells me what their foot health is like. So I'll just and I don't tell them that I'm evaluating them. To them, I'm just having them do a warm up, and I tell them to go really slow so I can see it. And I'm evaluating them just with a walking lunge. And then after that, we just start with pattern. We start slow with one limb, and we just pattern a simple movement. And we do it over and over again. You know, like the old saying, like, don't fear the man that's done 10,000 things, fear the man that's done one thing 10,000 times. Like, we do it really simple. We break it down in these little small pieces, and we very deliberately build on those small pieces, both in complexity and speed. So, you know, speed mass dysfunction, right? So it's hard to get these kids to really slow down. And you have to use like external cueing. So instead of you telling them they need to move their body in a certain way, like give them a task in their mind that they have to imagine, and they're trying to accomplish a task that just so happens to mimic the movement I'm trying to get them to do, and then to
Hmm.
do it really slowly. You know what I mean? So like when a kid does like a step up, right? And they're on their way down and they just keep crashing down or something. You know, I'm always like, pretend like you're landing on a box of kittens and you don't want to crush that box of kittens. And then all of a sudden, this kid that couldn't do it before is he starts to picture this box of kittens under his foot, and all of a sudden he starts to go down really slow and deliberately. You know, and like we all want to be these scientists and all of these terms, and sometimes just saying box of kittens works better than like, hey, do the eccentric more slowly or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, just say box of kittens.
Keeping it simple.
We don't have to
Keeping it
sound
simple,
smart.
man.
It's about being smart,
Yeah.
right? You
No,
know, and from that, like, yeah, basically it's just building, starting there and building up and speed and complexity. And, you know, we don't push them forward until they're ready for it. And then what I do is I give them cues that work for them, external cues. And I encourage them to every time they run outside of here to think of those external cues. You know, and I say, if you're not thinking about what we're working on in here outside of here, there's not enough stimulus twice a week at acceleration to make up for all the reps you're getting outside of here that are just rewiring those wrong movement patterns in. So I was like, a lot of this is going to be on you. When you leave here, you got to use what we did in here and continue to work on it. You know, cues for kids is like, I for little kids, I have them pretend like every body part is a superpower, and I'm like, on this rep, man, you got super feet, and I want you to run with super feet. And it sounds stupid, man, but when they start thinking about the bottoms of their feet, so I'm trying to get them to do, obviously, is strike with the ball of their foot and use the arch of their foot and the
Mm-hmm.
energy stored in that arch to help propel them, not be flat footed, and also vector it right. So if you pretend like you have super feet, all of a sudden you're going to picture yourself as Flash, and you're going to start getting those feet to punch back on the ground with better vector. Now, I'm not going to tell them that; it's pointless. Just say super feet, or I was like, hey, pretend like you're running out of a cave and you got to run real quiet so the giant doesn't wake up. Like little stuff, man. Now, some of these, we have kids that start at us with 9 years old, and they start to imagine that all of a sudden they stop breaking into the ground. They start like hitting the ground with better vector. So you got to find a way to reach these kids on their level rather than try to sound smart. You know what I mean?
No, I mean that makes perfect sense because basically you're just making it simple for the athlete. You're not trying to basically have a whole scientific breakdown where you just lose the person. It's like if you're talking to a middle schooler or a high schooler and you're trying to sound scientific, or do this mechanical movement and this will be the end result and this and that. You know, a lot of times it's just simple to say, hey, raise your knees, have your toes a little higher, and strike the foot as if you're clawing it in a sense, and that's how you should be running. You know what I'm saying? A
Yeah,
lot
man.
of coaches just tend to really they make things overly complicated when honestly simple is the best answer. And
Man, like, and I've had a lot of success with like just almost getting rid of internal cueing. So
mhm,
instead of telling a kid to get his knees up, like sometimes it works. A lot of times, if a kid's not a very good athlete, it doesn't. So when a kid's running and he's not getting good knee height, I'll be like, "Hey, man, pretend like you're having to run over tall grass." And I never once said anything about your knees. I was like, "Hey, pretend like you're just having to run over tall grass." Or if they have like a huge backside mechanic that's inappropriate, I'm like, "Hey, don't kick mud behind you." Like, "Hey, your best friend's running behind you who's got white pants on. Don't kick mud on him." And that is enough to get them to not overextend on the backside. You know what I mean? So you just got to find the cue that works for that kid. You know what I mean?
no, I mean, like I said, I really do like that because that's just some psychology there in the sense of you're keeping it so simple and you're referring to the movement in a way that they can comprehend. We spoke about recovery a little earlier, so I do want to get back to that. Now, when it comes to proper recovery, when it comes to titrating your workouts and spacing your workouts properly, so that the athlete is having enough time to recover between workouts. How do you go about that? What is your recommended days in between? And of course, every athlete is different, but just a generalization here. If an athlete does sprints on Monday, for example, would they be doing squats or jump or vertical jump training, plyometrics on Tuesday, or would that be Wednesday, or what would they be doing? How would you set up a basic week where the athlete is recovering properly?
Yeah, great question. General rule of thumb, if it's up to me, which normally it's not, I'm working, my hands are tied. I'm working with other programs and I don't get to pick when
Mm-hmm.
they squat, but if I controlled an athlete's whole program, they would never squat or never sprint the day after they squatted. Never. It just wouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not 2 days after they squatted on it. So if they squat on Monday, they probably won't sprint until Thursday, you
Mm-hmm.
know. But you can go the opposite way. So you can sprint on Monday. Now it's all dose dependent too, right? So if you go out and you do like 1060s full speed, man, that's gonna crush your central nervous system. So
100%,
um
man.
yeah, So I mean, if they sprint on Monday though, generally they're good to come in and squat and jump the next day. Usually jump first, obviously, right?
Mm-hmm. Of course.
But not vice versa. But then after 2 days of that, man, they're probably gonna need a deload day. Like, and here's the thing: people think that like if they're resting the muscle, then they're good. So if they think they do a heavy squat day on Tuesday, then they're good to do a heavy bench day on Wednesday. Even coaches think that. That's not really the
Central
case,
nervous
man. Because
system.
like, yeah, your central nervous system's still fried, So like,
Exactly.
um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, dude. So I mean, I'm talking deload day where they go and do some easy medicine ball throws and work on their hopping a little bit, or do sequence movements or just try to catch a tennis ball. Like you ever notice, like, dude, when you do like a super intense workout and you go to try to catch something, it's harder to catch something because like your central nervous system's so fried, it's hard to like do those fine motor skills, So like even if you do like a heavy bench day and then you try to play a football game the next day, it might affect your ability to catch a football, not just because your arms are tired, but because you can't, your central nervous system can't track objects maybe as well the next day. And like I think that's the key component. I always harp on it, but I feel like coaches just they always forget about the nervous system and how important that is. So I wouldn't do two. I don't care what spectrum of speed you're working, whether sprint, jumps, or lifts, or what body part you're doing. If it was up to me, I would never do more than two central nervous system intense workouts in a row before taking a break. So I would never do three of those in a row. I would never sprint hard, do legs hard, and do upper body hard all in a row. One of those days is always a deload. So kind of how I structure my own workouts, I do an upper lower body split because I like to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say I sprint hard on Monday, I might do a hard leg workout on Tuesday, but then on Wednesday, even though I'm doing upper body, that's more of just like a little pump day, sequence day, rehab day. I'm not going to push it hard. And then I'll normally take a day where I just, the next day, like Thursday, just do like a hip mobility day, ride the bike a little bit, go for a hike, and then I'll start in again. But this time it'll be more like an easy strider type workout later in the week. And then I'll do like an easy leg workout, and then I'll hit my heavy upper body day later that week, like on Friday or Saturday. So I'm always kind of like, it's always kind of a curve that I'm riding, right? Like go intense and then start to bring it back down again. You know what I mean? And I'll feel it, man. Sometimes I'm not responsible about it. Like sometimes I'll push it too hard because I'm not a competitive athlete. So it's like, it's not like I'm going to mess up the team if I don't do well. And I'm always trying
Yeah,
to
exactly.
I'm always experimenting too. Like how much can I take? Like, how is this going to affect my performance if I'm a little overtrained? But I'll feel it, man. I don't think as clearly when my central nervous systems. I don't track objects. Like if I'm throwing a football with a kid, man, sometimes I'll start dropping the football if I'm too fried and things like that. So I know what's happening. And I just employ that with my kids too. And then we forget too. Here's another thing, man. Obviously sleep is hugely important, but also these
Massive,
kids are studying
massive.
all day. Yeah, their brains are working all day, so that takes recovery too. You know what I mean? And that takes away from your central nervous system. So we have to take all that into account. You know, I kind of went
No,
on a tangent there.
no. I appreciate the tangent because, like, personally for me, I first started learning about the central nervous system when I was in high school, when I was doing track and field, and I was also playing. So I was crazy enough to both to do two sports in the same season. I was doing track and field as a jumper, and I was also playing volleyball. So I would go to track practice and then go to volleyball practice. So I'm going from doing sprinting and jumping to doing more jumping. Now I'm doing vertical jumping for volleyball, and I went from horizontal jumping. And I remember my performance in both sports was just like plummeting. I'm like, I should be at the peak right now. I'm like working out so much. So I started doing some research and I learned about the central nervous system, and it's basically a meter. It's like as as you keep going, the meter keeps dropping lower and lower, especially if you're doing a lot of plyometrics and heavy movements. And so now you have to figure out a way to make sure you're separating the workouts and giving enough space in between so that you're recovering your central nervous system and you're not burning out. So, for example, if on Monday I'm doing some heavy squats, when should the next time I do plyometrics, vertical jumping, or some sprinting? The earliest it should
48
be
hours, man.
exactly the earliest for me
Yeah.
is either Thursday or Friday.
Yes. Me too.
And, and
That's a good rule of thumb to go by. Two full days, I'd say it's just a good rule of thumb. You know what I mean?
you know, it really is because you're giving your body enough time to like recover. And maybe, for example, if you don't sleep too well that first night, you're giving yourself another night where you can hopefully get some proper sleep and recover some more so that you can start training again and do these very intense movements. And it's not just about the muscles. A lot of athletes, they think it's all just muscle. They don't understand that it's your central nervous system, how much your muscles can contract comes from your nervous system. So if that's fried, if you're lifting heavy, you're doing plyometrics, and you're not taking proper time to recover, then your performance will just start plummeting, and that's what we call overtraining, ladies and gentlemen. So that's where we end up.
Yeah.
Another thing that I like to do is, and personally for me, it's about every 8 weeks. I like to take a deload week where I'm still going to the
Yeah.
gym, but I'm going very, very light for myself and the athletes. So I'm just if I can bench 375, let's say 275 or 315, and that's what I'm working towards. Maybe on the deload week, I'm only doing 185 and I'm doing higher reps because one, that's not really affecting my nervous system too much. Same goes for the squat. Now, what do you think about having a deload week? And do you just recommend having a straight recovery week where you don't lift at all, or do you do active deload?
Active deload, man. That's another thing that programs are very bad about is there's like no deload week, you know?
Hmm.
Um, I'll have athletes that have trained 12 weeks in a row without a break. It's like you should never do that, you know? Like, so with me though, it's a fan like instead of the high rep thing, I like to do that lightweight and I'll just do like 3 quick reps with it. And people think
Hmm.
they're not getting much out of that, but you are, like you're getting some out of that. And then one of my favorite tools for deload weeks are medicine balls, man. Just like throw that medicine ball around a little bit, practice your sequence, you still get a little power work. And my rule of thumb for deload week is when you leave that week, and it doesn't have to be a deload week, man. Take 3 days or something even. It's better than nothing.
Yeah,
Um, when you leave those deload workouts, you should feel better than when you got there. You should feel like you're getting
100%.
ready to do an intense workout. You should
Hmm.
like break a sweat, sure. Work on some hopping, throw a little bit, but you should leave that like feel kind of bouncy and fresh. Like you should leave feeling better than when you got there. Basically, that's kind of the rule of thumb there.
And
And that's
you know
also,
that,
time to do a little weak point training too, man. If you want to do a little bodybuilding, like work on your triceps or something, that ain't gonna hurt you that bad, but it's got to be
yeah,
careful with that though.
some ISO movements and whatnot.
Yeah, why not? A little bit, like
Yeah.
the kid. I mean, kids like big chest and arms, right? So it's like, I'm into bodybuilding too, so I understand that. But and I think since I am into bodybuilding, they kind of listen to me more. It's like, listen, man, I
Hmm.
love to bodybuild too, but let's not fool ourselves.
So do I.
All
So
right.
do I. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like let's not think that this is making us that much better. Like okay, like I
Yeah.
got it, man. We all like big muscles, but it's not really making you that much better. So let's
It, it's, it looks good, but the performance isn't there.
yeah, you know what I
And
mean?
another thing about like normally when I come from a deload week, I see massive improvements in
Oh
everything.
man.
Whether it's
Yeah.
on my list, on my vertical jump, on my speed, everything has just gone up because I'm finally giving my central nervous system that
Hmm.
proper time to recover and
Hmm.
just rebuild itself. Now, another thing people don't realize is, and I recently had to explain this to several people, is you don't make progress in the gym. You make progress in the recovery portion of the
Yeah.
workouts. So if you're going to the gym like 7 days a week doing the same exact thing, that's not where you're making progress. Hey, hey, what's your son's name?
Oh, Levi. Yeah, say hi.
How you doing, Levi? Are you guys working hard together as well? Doing some
I got him a
movements?
punching bag last night. He's like a natural, man. Like he's doing
Really?
straight kicks and spinning back fists and stuff. He's like a natural. So I might
Oh,
get
he
him
wants to get
some.
into MMA or something, or
I don't know. I didn't think about it. He's pretty good at it, dude. So
oh, that's awesome, man. Any other
yeah.
sports that he plays?
Not yet. He likes basketball, but not yet.
Okay,
Right now he's more just
basketball.
jumping around. Yeah.
Oh man,
So
basketball is a great sport. It's fun. He's definitely gonna enjoy it.
yeah. Yeah, man. So another thing, man, is I completely agree with you. Is going in waves, right? So let's
Hmm.
say you have a time that you need to peak for, and you take a deload week. Now, let's say that's 3 weeks out from your competition. You can't just not lift heavy for those 3 weeks, right? So
Of
you're going to
course.
lift heavy, but your volume of that heavy lifting is going to be very low. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's not like you're either lifting heavy or you're not, right? So that's what people don't understand. It's like a phase. You phase it in and you phase it out. There's not really many times during the year where you're not doing anything for something, where you're not jumping at least a little bit, where you're not sprinting at least a little bit. So you're going to take a deload week where you're not going to do any heavy lifting, but after that, you're going to reintroduce the lifting, but it's going to be very low volume. You're going to do a couple heavy sets of squats, a couple heavy sets of hang cleans, and that's it for the week, man. So it's there. It's just a small dose. So you're reintroducing it. You're still getting that stimulus, but you're not draining that nervous system tank. You know what I mean? And you're starting to prime it and you're starting to peak it. So the week of a big football game, I don't think it's smart to not do any heavy lifting at all. But I mean, I'm talking about 6 or 7 total reps of heavy weight. You know what I mean? Like, and that
No,
reps, not sets. I'm talking about reps. like three sets of
No, and
three trap bar deadlift, and that's it.
yeah, sometimes it's just really just about keeping it up. And I remember my last year in college when I was jumping, I had a massive hamstring injury that I was dealing with all year long. It happened in October, and I was constantly trying to come back, but I'll keep re-injuring it. And I figured out a way where I could still compete, but that meant training twice a week. And
Yeah,
so basically it was Monday and Tuesday that I would train, and then Saturday was competition. Now, the reason why I did it that way was because after sprinting, my hamstring would get extremely, extremely sore for like 3, 4 days. So I figured to myself, I'm like, okay, if I stop training on Tuesday, I should be ready on Saturdays. Now, what I started to realize was by the time Saturday came around, I felt a lot less explosive. My speed was worse. And I'm like, that's too much space in between from the last time I did an explosive movement till when I
hmm
competed. And I think that also applies to what you just said when it comes to
hmm
lifting heavy weights and doing these intense movements. You know, it's really just about reducing the amount of reps you're doing. So then I went from stopping on Tuesdays to okay, on Thursday, I'm going to do 2, 3 sprints. That's it. That's all I'm going to do. And my performance started improving during my meets on Saturdays. And so I think it really is important just to like try to maintain. It's not a building phase when you're in season. Building phase is before the season, but maintaining is during the season. So I think it's very important for athletes to just try to maintain throughout the week. And
hmm
I'm really glad that you said that as well.
I mean, during the season, man, if you do it right, you're probably not gonna get add strength, but you can increase your power maybe. You know what I mean? It depends on what
Hmm.
basketball is kind of hard because it's so intense, but that's another thing I want to talk about. But first, like this is another thing, like bodybuilding is so like ingrained in our culture that I get a lot of
Hmm.
comments on Instagram about, well, there's no eccentric there, and eccentric is where the muscle grows and blah blah blah. Yeah, man, but
Hmm.
eccentric is where the muscle damage is done too.
Hmm.
So like if you want to keep your force production and that nervous system strength, consider taking the eccentric out during the season where you're just pushing on something and then just dropping it. So you
Just
can still get that
concentric.
stimulus. Yeah,
Hmm.
but the eccentric is what's hard to recover from. So, those are like when you do those deadlifts and just drop the bar, or you do like pin presses and then you just let the bar go back to the pin and you don't really try to stop it. So there is a time when like you should not really be doing a lot of eccentrics, man. And like we got to get that out of our heads. Like yeah, eccentrics are great and they serve a purpose, but they're not. You don't always have to have that eccentric when you're lifting, and sometimes it's not a good thing. You know, so that's a big thing, man. Is we're just hardwired. Like, oh, the muscles got to grow, and it's like, no, not really, man.
Yeah, and no, and it's funny too because one of my most basic philosophies when it comes to track and field is you want to be as strong as possible while being as light as possible. Because
Yeah.
track is not it's not football. You don't need muscle mass. You want to be strong because the stronger you are and the lighter you are, the faster and higher you jump. Or the
Even
faster
in
you
football, man,
higher you
way too
jump.
much emphasis on muscle mass, dude. I mean, these running backs gaining all this weight, they start to get hurt, dude. I mean, like, there's still way too much, and I think they're getting it now because, like, you don't think that they have the science and technologies to where if they wanted to, every football player could look like a massive bodybuilder, but they don't
And of
because they know
course.
better now. They're starting to learn, like, eh, yeah, like, and that eccentric just takes so much recovery. Like, why would you even impose that, during the week? So,
Yeah,
we
I
have
mean,
this 1080 Secro where it's just there's no eccentric. You start down and we can set the movement. It's isokinetic, right? Is one of the functions. So we set the
mhm.
movement in however many feet per second or meters per second we want that bar to move. And no matter how hard you push on that bar, it's only going to move that fast. So these athletes might do 2 or 3 concentric all-out isokinetic reps, and they'll be completely fried from that for a few minutes. But there's no eccentric there, so they're not sore the next day, but they still get that force production benefit out of that. And I think in the future, that's kind of the way that it's going to start to trend if we get smart. Is in season, we're going to greatly reduce the amount of eccentric loading on these muscles. And it's a couple heavy push. The football player will get in there, push as hard as they can on something for 2 to 3 reps, and that's it. Because it gets that stimulus and then they just move on, you know?
You know, That is something I've really never thought about, but it makes perfect sense to me because a lot of times when you watch bodybuilders, they really focus on tension, and the tension comes from the eccentric movement when the muscle is stretching. And when the muscle is stretching, that's when those microfiber tears occur and the muscles have to rebuild themselves to become bigger. And that's what bodybuilding is. You're trying to add size, so that, but it makes perfect sense to me that concentric movements during the season will be more beneficial than concentric movements, because I mean, the eccentric movements do take a lot. They take a lot away from you. For example, when working on my hamstrings, and one of the things that I really focus on when it comes to hamstrings is the eccentric movement, lowering the weight in a slow manner because of the stretch factor of it. Because when you're sprinting, most hamstring injuries occur during the eccentric movement.
Hmm.
But that's really an off-season training,
Yeah.
trying to make
Or
sure
maybe
that I'm
something.
building.
Yeah, maybe or something you do for a couple reps really early in the week, right? So like let's say your
Yeah.
game's on Friday. It's cool to do like 2 sets of 6 Nordics with a slow, heavy eccentric on Monday, because then you'll
hmm
have some day. I'm talking 2 sets though, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so if you're gonna do it in season, very small dosage, but you're right, man. I mean, the eccentric component is incredibly important for hamstring health. So I wouldn't totally abandon that during the season, but make sure it's not within 3 days of your sport. Make sure the volume is really low, things like that. And also like a lot of that is like that's why I do a lot of straight legged bounding and stuff, because it's that massive eccentric catch when that foot first hits the ground that you got to train for. So like these bodybuilders who do like these leg curls and think that their hamstrings are ready to go. I'm like, that is nothing at all like the demand on the hamstring when you're sprinting, bro. All you're doing is
No,
setting
not
yourself
even
up for him.
close. Not even
Like all
close.
these bodybuilders I see, man, they pull their hamstrings immediately when they try to sprint. And so I was like, no, man, you need a heavy eccentric load, or you need a very fast eccentric load, like just that foot hits the ground and it instantly has to like contract against that tension. And they're completely unprepared for sport. Like bodybuilders are some of the worst athletes, man. Honestly, dude, they are. That's why my Instagram grew, because nobody's used to seeing a dude with muscles move, and for good reason. Because dudes with big muscles normally can't move because they don't try to move. Like
I mean,
they don't move like
everything is
athletes.
tight. Everything is very
Everything's tight.
tight. I mean, it's like with any movement, you have to train for that movement in order to become efficient at it. If you're not training for the movement, when you try to do it, your likelihood of injury is goes up by a significant amount. So you have to actually train for the movement that you're trying to improve in. You can't just lift heavy weights
No,
and
man,
think that you're going to become
stupid.
a fast sprinter or jump
It's
high because you're
ridiculous.
because you're lifting weights.
Here's another thing they don't consider.
Movement.
Like, look at athletes, man. A defining characteristic of athletes is their ability to relax, right? So, like,
Of
for every agonist, you have an antagonist, right? So if you get
course.
tense, you can be strong, but as long as that antagonist isn't relaxing, the force that gets exerted is going to be limited because you're fighting against yourself. You're burning. So, like, when a sprinter sprints, they're relaxed, like
Yes.
so bodybuilders, they
100%.
don't have the ability to sequence, meaning they don't know, their nervous system doesn't know when to turn off muscles appropriately. So that's why they look stiff when they run. It's like it's not just about the muscles you use, it's about the muscles your brain knows not to use at that moment. That's a whole thing they never think about.
That's no, and I'm really happy you said about the relaxing for sprinters because a lot of times when you see athletes, they're they're so tense when they're sprinting. And first off, if you're tense, you're not moving as fast. And second, when you're that tense, you're also losing a lot more energy than you should be losing. And you said
Exactly.
something earlier about sprinting, and this is something a lot of people don't know. When you're sprinting, you only have about 2 to 3 seconds of max speed. Like when you see Usain Bolt sprinting, his top speed is only for 2 to 3 seconds. It's
He's not
not the
getting
whole.
faster, everybody else is getting slower, you know what I mean?
Exactly, and his speed
It's
is
an optical
increasing
illusion.
at the end. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not, you don't maintain top speed for long periods of time. It's literally just seconds. And if you're tense, that means like maybe now you're holding that top speed for like a second rather than the 2 seconds or the 3 seconds that you're supposed to be allocated to. And so it's very,
So true.
beneficial. make sure you're relaxed. And that brings me to another question that I have, and something that I really try to focus on, and that is flexibility, right? Um, a lot of athletes don't stretch, and I always like to use this analogy when it comes to running faster or jumping higher. You know, you have to imagine your muscles as a rubber band. You pull the rubber band back, the further you can pull
Yeah.
it back, the further it will go when you release it. Now, if you have a tight rubber band, what happens? Either that rubber band tears or you release it doesn't go that far. So can you please talk about the importance of flexibility, what you think about it, and how you incorporate it in training your athletes?
Okay, so this is my take. I don't do flexibility at all. I do mobility.
Really?
Because here's the
Okay.
thing, flexibility is a passive action. So
Mm-hmm.
when they put people under, they could be the most inflexible dude in the world. They can take his head and pull a foot and pull it up over his head. So it's a neural tonic signal that your muscles are getting that's preventing that muscle from fully relaxing because your brain knows that it would be dangerous if it let it do that. So I do mobility, and mobility is
Mm.
more muscle length under some tension dynamically, where one foot
Dynamic
is or
stretching.
something is
Mm-hmm.
anchored into the ground. So I will get most of my mobility training with weights. So like I will do like a very low, deep Cossack squat with, a moderate amount of weight very slowly. So I'm always training that muscle at length under a little tension. I don't do a lot of conventional stretching, man. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And I'll do a lot of like and after warm I'll do some dynamic stuff with like my hips or like leg swings and things like that, where I'm just getting things to relax, but I'm not laying on my back. And normally when I stretch my clients out, it's not for that muscle, is to alleviate some of the tension on a muscle that's hurting them. Like if they got like a lower back that's hurting them, I'll stretch out their
Mm-hmm.
glutes and hamstrings because letting those relax a little bit will take a little tension off that lower back temporarily to buy us some time to get everything warmed up. But these people that like chronically stretch, like what you're doing, man, is if you're a chronic stretcher, like I love yoga, right? But some
Mm-hmm.
people you are super
I tried
flexible.
yoga, man. It
It's
wasn't for
hard.
me.
It's hard,
It's
man.
hard. It's
But
hard. It is hard.
one of the greatest things about yoga though is holding those positions under tension is hard, like there's a
Mm-hmm.
flexibility aspect to it, but like holding that stability, but these people that they're hypermobile think they're super healthy and like not really, man. I mean, because if you can't control that mobility at speed under tension, it does you no good.
You want to
So
know
you can pull
something?
your leg.
I don't
Oh,
want
go
to
ahead.
cut
I'm
you
sorry.
off. I don't want to cut you off, but like the hypermobility. So I was born with hypermobility, and
Oh, yeah.
because of that reason, I've had multiple surgeries because I tend to strain my muscles, and um, especially with my hips. My hips are bad because from all my sports, that when I'm like sprinting, I'm having little extra movements that are happening that should
Mhm.
not be happening because of my hypermobility. And so I just wanted to like point out that aspect of it out. For me, is personally for me is different for me because I have hypermobility. But when I talk about flexibility and stretching, I do think it is important to one, work on mobility and also do some stretching just so that those muscles are more elastic. But
Mhm.
there's many ways of going about stretching. You have dynamic and then you have static stretching. And for example, they always say start with dynamic stretching, warm up rather than static stretching because you want to make sure you're mimicking the movements that you're going to be performing later on when you're either practicing or doing the actual sport itself. So I just wanted to have a quick little input, but you can
So
continue.
one of my favorite things to do is neither really dynamic or stat. It's PNF stretching, the
Mm-hmm.
proprioceptive neurological facilitation. And
Yeah.
that is when you apply a force against an object and then relax it, alternating those two, or
Mm-hmm.
when you activate the antagonist of what you're trying to stretch to get that agonist to relax a little bit. And so it's kind of neither dynamic or static. It's PNF.
Mm-hmm.
It's apply force, then relax, and apply force, and then relax, and gradually increase that range of motion. So that is probably my favorite way to stretch. And it might
Okay.
look like static stretching to some people, but I'm always applying tension throughout that stretch and then relaxing it with my breathing. So I would encourage people to explore PNF as an option. It's very old
TNF.
school, and I think we kind of yeah, I think we kind of forgot about it a little bit. Um, but yeah, so it's like let's say you're trying to stretch your pec out, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you just yank on that muscle, your brain is going to fight that because it's tight for a reason, right?
Yeah.
But if you first start with a pec contraction for about 6 to 18 seconds, and then you relax that pec, your brain is going to relax a little bit because it knows it's ready. And then you do it again and it'll relax a little bit more. You know what I mean? And then conversely, you go and you do the antagonist stretching, reciprocal inhibition, where let's say I want to stretch my pec out. The first thing I would do is probably do like a lat exercise where I put a lot of tension on my lat because my brain knows that I'm trying to use my lat. So it's going to help my pec relax first. So a lot of people want to stretch their hip flexors out, right? So the first thing they'll do, cold, they'll take a knee and they just start cranking on that hip flexor, right? I'm like, nah, bro, do a glute bridge because you lay on your back and you contract your glutes and your brain knows that you're contracting your glutes. So it's going to start to help you relax those hip flexors. Do that first before you ever tug on a muscle because your brain is going to then help you out. And then now after you do your glute bridges, then you do a little PNF where you apply tension and then relax, tension and relax. And then after that, then you can go ahead and stretch that thing out. But just tugging on a tight muscle is not going to do the trick. You got to trick your brain into it a little bit.
Man, I'm really I'm really glad that we're having this conversation because I'm learning so much from you, and that was one of the things that I was really looking forward to was just learning from you, and just that example of the glute bridge to really stretch out or activate the hip flexors. That is not something I have ever thought about personally, but that is something that does make sense to me. As someone who likes to learn about fitness and training, um, that makes perfect sense. That makes
Like a little hack, right? Like let's say you're
yeah.
testing for the vertical jump, man. Everybody wants to stretch out their glutes and hamstrings, right? I'm like,
Hmm.
nah, man, stretch out your hip flexors. Like get your hip flexors ready because like if your hip flexors tight, it's not gonna let your hips extend, because it's gonna
Yeah.
so I mean, don't worry about your glutes and hamstrings, bro. Like go through that little thing I just talked about to get your hip flexors more mobile, because that will let you go into full hip extension when you do your vertical. Like because
No,
then your
that's
glutes
right.
and everything won't be fighting against tight hip flexors. So it's like little tricks of the trade, right?
And another trick or kettlebell swings if you're trying to really work on your vertical because
Love it, dude.
a
Yeah.
lot of that comes from the hip. And if you're
Love it.
that's
Yeah.
a fantastic warm up if you're getting ready for a vertical jump test. So that's another trick that you guys can
Love it.
use.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love kettlebell swings and I
You
read
ever
this
do like
book.
banded kettlebell swings? I
I've
got a
never
video on
done
there.
banded.
So you wrap a band around the kettlebell and you step on the band, and then that band will pull you back down. So when you get to the top, it's kind of some momentum up
Yeah.
there. But when you get up there, that band will stretch and then it'll pull you back down into that fast eccentric loading. But I love kettlebell swings to get ready for vertical stuff, man. That's
No,
love them.
I mean, it's amazing, and it's not just as a warm up; it's also like a great workout. I don't know if
Yeah.
you ever read this book, Easy Strength. I read that book, and they were talking about kettlebell swings, over eccentric kettlebell swings, where you bring it down fast, so that you're basically mimicking a squat, a vertical jump, and then you bring it back up, and you go on your toes as you're bringing the kettlebell back up. And that was something that I sort of incorporated in my own workouts and my clients, and significant improvements from just adding that into the movement. And another thing is when it comes to hips, like hips are, I don't know if maybe this is hyperbolic to say, but they're everything when it comes to performance. Like whether you're a shot putter, it comes from the hips. Whether you're sprinting, it
Everything.
comes from the hip. Whether it comes from dunking a basketball, it comes from the hip.
Like
And
golfing,
kettlebells,
boxing, throwing a baseball, throwing a
e-
football. I can't think of
exactly.
anything that
If
does it
you're
that's not centered on it. Yeah. Like you
exactly
don't have
that,
big arms. Big arms don't help you throw a punch, man. Like having mobile hips does. Like you got to flip the hips,
yeah,
dude.
that
Like
the
yeah.
power comes. It's a kinetic chain. The power comes from your hip, and then so man, like
Yep.
so that's something athletes like. That's something that I never hear online or coaches ever talk about, and it's the hips, man.
Man, I see
Honestly.
all these dudes in the gym, man. I don't want to hate on dudes because I feel them, but they're kind of
Mm-hmm.
making fun of me for doing all this hip work. Sometimes they'll be like, "Why do you do all this girl stuff?" I'm like, "Man, if you don't have healthy hips, bro, like, like it ain't how your butt looks, man. Like, if you can't step over a fence or like turn your knee out, I mean, like, I don't care how much you can bench press. Like you're like all these dudes are chronically horrible hip strengths and mobility. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and who cares about how big your pecs are when you're 50 years old if you can't like stand up out of bed or anything? Like, it's just like no dudes have healthy hips. And then my biggest sign of an athlete, man, if I see a dude walking around with his toes pointed straight out, like duck footed, I'm like, that dude's not an athlete. Because you got weak adductors, like weak glutes, just letting the external rotators pull your toes out. Like you mentioned 400 pounds,
Yeah,
you're walking around duck foot.
if your feet are like pointing out this way, you got a problem. You
Let me
got a
ask you something,
problem.
bro. Have you ever seen like a phenomenal athlete that walks duck footed? I've never seen one.
Never, never,
I've
man.
never seen Walter Payton walk on the field duck. Michael Jordan didn't walk on the basketball duck footed. Like I never seen it
No,
happen, dude.
never.
Now
And
sometimes they're a
that
little
makes
pigeon toe, but
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, pigeon, like if you talking about athlete, if you look at LeBron, he's a little pigeon toed.
they're all pigeon
Uh,
toed. All the best athletes are
but
pigeon toe, man.
but yeah, you never see the foot going outwards. If
Never.
it's going outwards, you got a problem, man. That's
That's my first time an athlete. If I see a dude that's duck footed, I'm like, he ain't an athlete. I ain't worried about
no
this dude,
way. And then oftentimes when you hear them running, you can hear their footsteps. It's
bro.
so loud. It's
Bro, if
like
you hit the ground with with a foot that's already externally rotated, you're screwed. Because like
no.
sprinting is about like rotating around a center of axis, right? So you have to
Hmm.
get that internal rotation and uncoil as that foot hits the ground. So if you're already duck footed and you hit, you got no coil left. And that works
There's
for
nothing
jumps too. A
there.
lot of these dudes, they'll look at a dude jump and they think they got valgus collapse, right? No, man, they're coiling their lead leg so that they can store energy off of it. That's not a valgus collapse, man. That's an internal rotation coil. And if you're duck
Yeah,
footed, you got no coil. Like it's not just like jumping straight up in the air, man. These athletes, if you break it down, man, it's beautiful. They'll plant with that lead leg, they'll turn that knee in the inside edge of that foot, and they'll uncoil it as they jump. It's like a thing of beauty, bro. You know,
it's a spring. It's a spring,
it's a spring.
and that's where technique comes into play because when I was learning how to jump off both legs, like it was a learning process because I'm a one leg jumper, right? But when
Hmm.
it came to learning how to jump off two legs, it was like it felt so alien to me, and it took years and years of work to actually get the movement down so I can be efficient at it. And people always want to know what's the quickest way to increase your vertical jump. The quickest way is technique. If you improve your technique, that's the quickest way because now the movement becomes 100 times more efficient. You're
Everybody's
just
like, "Hey, how do I increase
efficiency
my
alone.
vertical?" I'm like, "Yeah, I did the same way." They're like, "How do I increase my vertical?" I'm like, "Practice your vertical. Practice jumping. How about that?" Do we
Hmm.
forget about like just like how do I hit a baseball better? It ain't squatting, bro. Practice hitting a baseball. Like
The
if you want to
movement.
jump higher, practice jumping, man, and like do it with a deliberate, sense of purpose. Like you did it. You analyze the movement and you practice the movement. Like if they say, "How do I get my vertical better?" Man, 9 times out of 10, I'm like, well, how many times do you actually practice your vertical a week? If you ain't done the kids that dunk the best are these kids that just play street ball. And everybody's like, oh, it's because they're black. No, it's man, because they're not sitting on their butt playing video games. They're out there
Yeah,
practicing basketball every day. I know some white dudes that can jump through the roof because they were out there playing basketball 6 hours a day. Like, no, man,
exactly,
you
man.
can't jump. It ain't because he's white. It's because he sits on his butt and plays video games. Like,
Exactly. It's like if you're going to watch TV all day, there's no way in hell you're going to be able to dunk a basketball. Like that's how you see like guys that are 6'4", 6'5", and they can't dunk. And I'm like that is like shameful. And like I
some of
started
those dudes have good verticals too. They just have shitty dunk technique. Like they don't know how to
exact
dunk.
no and trust me, I've seen that so many times because you go to LA Fitness. I don't know if you guys have that in Texas, but you go to
We do, yeah.
LA Fitness and guys are playing basketball and the guy he's like 6'4", 6'6", and he can't dunk, but he's and I'm like, bro, all you have to do is just work on your technique. Like I'm like, you don't have to have a 40-inch vertical jump. Like
No.
just work on your technique and it'll be easy for you. That or you know what? Just get stronger and you can dunk from a vertical standstill. That's it.
Well,
You know.
like sort of the analogy, like you said, is like the strength. Like there has to be a strength component there, right? You need a base
Hmm.
of strength to be just like to be a good sprinter. But after that base of strength is there, then to practice your skill. Like that's why I always tell kids, I'm like, never skip practice to come to me. You know
It's
what I
the
mean? Because
movement.
I know I'm
Hmm.
important, but I ain't more important than you practicing the skill of your sport. Like people forget that. So like these soccer players, they have them like running gassers to stay in shape. I'm like, you don't need to do that. Just play soccer. Like just go play
Exactly.
soccer.
The
Like
best way to get in basketball shape is to play basketball a lot.
play basketball. It's a
Yeah,
beautiful
man.
thing. You don't need to run gassers. Just play basketball.
And that's really what it comes down to. And it's more enjoyable too. So
Yeah, right.
there's a lot more adherence to it. But before we close it out, I want to talk about proper sleep. And you know, that's something these days that's not taken seriously by both athletes and just regular people who are going to the gym, or just not even going to the gym, but just regular people who are just living life. They don't take sleep seriously. And so can you talk about the importance of sleep recovery and just what it does to your body as a whole?
Yeah, man. So, there's an imbalance in this country of sympathetic versus parasympathetic focus, right?
Hmm.
Most people don't even know what that is, which is shameful. But, like all of the recovery happens when you're in that parasympathetic stage. And a
Hmm.
lot of that occurs during sleep, good sleep. A lot of it occurs during the day too, by focusing on like, proper breathing and deep breathing and meditation. You gotta get that stuff down during the day. You gotta schedule times when you can take short breaks and just focus on your breathing. That goes a long way, first of all.
Yeah,
Secondly,
like
I don't know where
decompressing.
this yeah, I don't know where this concept of 8 hours of sleep came from. Because like if you're an athlete that's like between the ages of 10 and 20, you need probably 9 to 10 hours a night, man, if you're gonna be optimal. Athletes have to sleep more. The 7 hours of sleep just ain't cutting it for athletes. They need to get 10 hours a night. You know what I mean? And that means like if you're getting to bed at if you're having to get up at 7 in the morning, man, that means you got to get to bed at like 9. And they don't like to hear that.
100%.
And that means you got to get ready for bed at like 7, start like setting the stage, start to dim those lights, start to like, no caffeine, things like that, start to hydrate, start to cool your body temperature a little bit, start to be deliberate with it, control your light, more red lights, not as much blue light. And I take supplements too, man. Like make sure I get my vitamin D. I take some valerian root, GABA,
Mhm.
alpha GPC. Like I take the supplements when I get older, man. And it helps me too. Like sleep is huge, dude. Like and
Yeah.
especially for women. So like these women come in and they want every drug in the world. They want to work out really hard. The first thing I ask, like, how's your stress? How's your sleep? And if you're stressed out, if the cortisol's high, if they're only getting 4 hours of sleep a night, I'm like, we can't do anything in the world in here. You ain't gonna gain an ounce of muscle. You're not gonna lose any fat. Because first thing you got to do is get back to your parasympathetic dominant system. And they don't like to hear that. Do less, sleep more, relax more, drink less wine. How about? Like, why are you drinking a bottle of wine before you go to bed? You know
Oh
what I
my.
mean? Like,
And and that's the thing. Like if you're drinking wine before you're going to sleep, you have just destroyed your sleep for the night.
yeah, you might
now
fall
you're
asleep easier, but
yeah, but
you
you're
won't.
wasting. But
But it
like
won't be recovery.
you're not getting any REM sleep. There's no deep sleep occurring when you're drinking alcohol before going to sleep. And and that's another thing when it comes to the lights. Blue lights are terrible for sleep. I have blue light blocking glasses on every night before I go to sleep, and I put them on 2 hours beforehand, and I stop touching my phone. I don't touch my phone. I don't go on Instagram. I don't go on social media because I'm really at this point just trying to relax and just put my body in a state of recovery and relaxation, and not, on edge looking at what's happening next on social media, who's posting a new story, and
Hmm.
watching some TV with extreme things going on. Now I have that on my mind before I go to sleep because it's taken away from my sleep. And also fluid intake. A lot of times we wake up in the night to go use a bathroom, but probably 3 hours before you go to sleep, probably stop drinking water before then. And you
Now here's
know,
a little thing too. Like, I got it, man. These are our lives. We got kids. We got stress. We'll have a nightcap with our wife or husband or whatever. Shit ain't gonna be perfect, right? But any little
of
change
course
you can
not.
make in the right direction helps, right? If you can dim some lights
Mhm.
earlier on, you know what I mean. Any change you can make is for the better. So it doesn't. If like, don't feel like you have to get everything lined up or do nothing at all.
Mhm.
Just like if you can just, instead of having like 3 glasses of wine, just have one glass. I mean, that makes a big difference. Like
That does make a
just
big
small steps
difference.
in the right direction. Like every
Mhm.
little thing you can do is gonna help. You know what I mean?
No, it definitely anything you can do when it comes to sleeping, because ultimately that's what's going to determine your performance, whether you know, whether it comes down to recovery, whether it comes down to being able to lift some weights, jumping higher, running faster. If you're having bad sleep on a regular basis, like just
Hmm.
try getting 4 hours of sleep and performing a vertical jump test. Like on average, maybe if you get 8 hours of sleep a night, you might jump 30 inches. You get 4 hours of sleep, test your vertical, you might get 24 inches that day. You
Right,
know,
it's true though, right?
that's how much effects bad sleep has on
It's true.
the quality of your performance, you know.
It's true.
Um, yeah, so I want athletes to really focus on their proper sleep. But Justin, it's been a pleasure, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for doing this with me. And
Yeah, my
I'm
pleasure,
hoping
man.
we can do this again, man. I really am because
Yeah.
I've learned a lot from you, man. And so please tell, you know, the folks where they can find you, whether it's your social media or website, whatever it may be.
So,
Yeah,
I'm on Instagram under always be an athlete is mine. And
I'll
I'm
make
part of
sure
a
to put that at the bottom so they can see.
And so I'm part of Acceleration. The website's
Hmm.
YB Slow, all one word, ybslow.com. And there's a guy that works actually like jumping is not my specialty, right? It's more
Hmm.
speed and other stuff. There's a guy that works with me named Daniel Back, and he's at Jump Science. So
Hmm.
he's the guy. If you want to have a good conversation about jumping, it's at Jump Science. And
Hmm.
that dude knows his stuff, man. He's the jump specialist where I work. It's not me. So really good conversation with that guy. Very smart dude, man. So yeah, at Jump Science and at Acceleration is where I'm from.